So in about 20 years of working with organizations around the world to help them communicate more effectively, there's one thing that I think makes a real difference to great communication, and I want to share that one thing with you today. And that is, it's not really about what you say. The really important thing is about taking responsibility for what's understood. I want to show you an example of what happens when we're only really concerned with what we say and not really concerned with what's understood by our audience. This is a clip from Channel 9 in Australia, which some of you may have seen before, interviewing the Dalai Lama.
So the Dalai Lama walks into a pizza shop.
Pizza shop, correct?
Pizza?
Pizza shop, yes.
Yeah, pizza shop. And says, "Can you make me one with everything?"
What's that? That's what it. Oh, yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Do you know what he means? I love this piece of communication. It's somebody just casually casting communication in the vague direction of an audience and hoping that it'll be understood, but really with little regard for the cultural norms or for any of the context within which that communication's happening. We heard the translator translating the words, so it's not about that. But it's perhaps about the understanding of the cultural norms and the differences there. Maybe the joke format itself wasn't understood. Maybe it's the culture of pizza ordering itself. Or maybe it's just this strap line for Buddhism, this kind of being at one with everything, which perhaps doesn't travel even to the Dalai Lama. So I'm interested in this because what I see in my work is that undercurrents of these sorts of misunderstandings can influence way more of our communications than perhaps even we're aware of on a day-to-day basis. And I think today, as individuals and organizations, and we're called upon to engage with some of the most sort of complex communications and cultural issues, we need to be really sure of our understanding. You know, we really need to be sure that we are taking responsibility for what's understood. Let me tell you a few stories of things that I think make a difference to our communication. And the first one is that context matters. You know, I come here today, and I'm relatively clear of the context. I need to be here to give a talk to you guys. And I hope that you guys have come here to sit and listen at least to some of what I've got to say. It's quite easy for me to make some assumptions about you as an audience and try and tailor my communication around that. But what we're talking about is the times when that context is not understood or is misjudged, and it leads us to gridlocks in communication. Let's take just a single word and see what happens. The word simple. In the UK, simple typically means something like uncomplicated or easy. But that same word in the US can be inflected slightly differently and be much more associated with ideas like minimalist. In France, it can be used to describe the rural or the bucolic. It brings a different meaning with it because of the context within which it's spoken. And in Japan, it can be associated with ideas of smallness or diminutive. And this sort of slippage between the word and what it means in different cultural contexts, it really underpins a lot of our communication issues. It can really lead to gridlock, can lead to a lack of understanding and lots of time misspent and energy misspent. Clean as well, a simple universal notion like clean, becomes encoded so differently in different cultures. If we talk about clean in Mexico, we always draw on ideas of moral purity. You know, the idea that cleanliness is next to godliness in some way? Whereas in Japan, with its sort of focus on a personal cleansing ritual in their culture, the idea of cleanness is much more close to the idea of beautiful. In fact, they have the same word, kire, that looks to articulate both of those meanings. And in China, we see cleanness very close to the idea of whiteness. Both of them are associated with ideas of aspiration, ideas of progress, typically progress away from the rural environment. What I love about understanding these sort of ecosystems of meaning, these ecosystems of cultural nuance, is they don't stay static. They evolve as well over time. Cultures evolve, languages evolve, meanings evolve. And it takes a degree of attentiveness just to sort of master some of that. In the UK, once upon a time, clean was very associated with the idea of being civilized. The British Isles were nicely boundaried by our cordon sanitaire, kept us safe from the people in Europe. But you know now, thank heavens, we can perhaps see some more positive associations of the idea of clean in the UK. It's much more likely to be used in connection with things like clean data, being clean from drugs, clean energy. But the important thing is that words rely upon their context for the meaning. And that's kind of the work that we do over the years, is working with organizations to construct international communication, to find an idea that can represent a notion across multiple markets, multiple countries, multiple cultural groups. Our start point for this work, though, is that everything communicates. So it's really not just the words, because images communicate too, as do fonts and colors and scents and textures and sounds. All of these elements, or signs as we would call them, are constructed through culture, interpreted through culture to construct meaning. And we need to be aware of how all these individual components sort of come together to create the overall meaning that we're looking to communicate, and therefore to have a better chance of being responsible for understanding. So in this big swirl of words and meaning and things changing along the line, sometimes it's really nice to try and take sanctuary in the language of numbers, to say, here is a space in which we can articulate an unarguable truth. But you know, I'd like to suggest today that even the language of numbers is subject to interpretation and is sometimes subject to misunderstanding. How about the number 2? You could see that as quite simple, maybe. The number 2 is also the number 2.0, or the same as the number 2.00, just measured to different levels of precision. And we can happily and cheerfully round up the number 1.56 to the number 2, or round down the number 2.44 to the number 2. So 2 itself could exist anywhere in that space. What makes a difference is the assumptions that we make, the context within which we're operating, and really whether those assumptions are agreed between us as we communicate. We're very used in the UK to seeing numbers in the news. We're used to seeing numbers construct a truth for us, perhaps subvert a truth for us, or create a new truth that we hadn't thought of before. We're quite used to currently seeing the number for our national deficit being framed sometimes within the context of our GDP, and sometimes just on its own. And those numbers tell two very different stories and communicate two very different meanings. So in a world where big data looms large for us in all of our lives, I would suggest and encourage us to be thoughtful and to be intelligent about the meaning that we draw from those numbers, and considerate of the meanings that our audiences may draw from the numbers that we communicate. The other language that we are really interested in our work at the moment is the digital language and how that's changing. This, I'm sure you're all very aware, is the tears of joy emoji. This year is the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year. Not emoji of the year, it's the word of the year. You see, emojis now are sort of getting to the point where they're beyond the emotional punctuation, beyond the text with the smiley face at the end of it. They are, in some ways, tone of voice for a digital medium which has no tone and has no voice, arguably. They extend our language. They extend what we're able to describe. It's quite difficult to say what you will say in a digital medium with words and an emoji without that emoji. And this is the emoji that's the most widely used in the whole world at the moment, apart from in France. Isn't that lovely? I love the thought that the two emojis that we want to use, the two symbols that we want to use in the digital space, more than anything, are the tears of joy and the heart representing love and compassion. The raised hand is an interesting one. You know, sometimes that can communicate a high five. Sometimes it can communicate something different. It can communicate stop, for example. And that all depends upon context. So you see, what we're starting to understand is these new digital languages work in the same way as our verbal language, that the meaning they communicate is subject to context. And that's important for big organizations who are starting to want to use these digital languages to, recruit younger people or to communicate with different audiences. But, beyond the sphere of the corporates and the organizations that we work with, there's also a real need in the public sector for us to take responsibility for how we're understood by the recipients of the care and the services that we provide. I just want to end by telling you a personal story. It wasn't so long ago that I was arriving at hospital for a radiotherapy appointment. It was the first appointment I'd gone to. It was a beautiful, high-tech hospital full of very intelligent, very talented, brilliant people. And when I got to reception, the lady said, can you hurry up? You're on linear accelerator 4 in 6 minutes. Linear accelerator 4, what sort of hell is this? This is what it was. Rational, accurate, but to me, walking through the door at that moment, that was a really terrifying proposition. And as I walked through the waiting room with this in my mind, I noticed a rack of leaflets. And one of the leaflets said to me, "Feel better with a free makeover." I thought, oh, that's lovely. I'll feel better with a free but there was another leaflet just gently overlapping it. And that other leaflet offered me a service to rapidly make my will. So you see, everything communicates. Everything communicates in context. The receptionist, the name of the linear accelerator, the leaflets, all of that built the total understanding that I took from that communication. What I needed from the department was just to take one more step, to take a little bit more responsibility for the totality of their communication, a little bit more responsibility for how they were going to be received and going to be understood. Whoever wrote that sign, the linear accelerator sign, there was a moment. There was a moment when that could have been a treatment room. There was a moment when that could have been a healing zone. And we're starting to understand that by using that sort of language, that language of compassion, that language of empathy, that there are real, genuine positive outcomes on treatment from communicating in that sort of way. So everything communicates. Let me just reflect then on what I think perhaps are the 3 things that make a difference. Remember that context matters. Just take 2 minutes to understand your audience. Take 2 minutes to just somehow understand where they are, what assumptions they're making. Try and make sure you get the context up front. It's worthwhile. It becomes intuitive if you practice it. Remember that everything communicates. We need to look a little bit beyond the obvious to understand the other elements of communication, which perhaps are coming in and either contributing to or detracting from the understanding we're trying to create. And finally, be aware of this as a receiver as well as a communicator. Maybe true enlightenment lies in knowing that the person that's speaking to you finds it hard to do this as well. And if we can do those 3 things, if we can do those 3 things in 1% of our communication as a group of people, that, I think, will start to make an enormous difference to the kinds of communication and cultural challenges that are ahead of us. So my wish is for everybody today to have the courage to go out there and to take some more responsibility for understanding and for being understood. Thank you very much.